In part 1 of the routed table video, I left it at the point where I needed to finish milling the 12 lengths of wood required for the build. I had an issue with the table saw and the jig I was using, and I said I was going to fix it with the thicknesser. However, on reflection, I knew that wasn't the correct method. If I'm going to keep using pallets for lumber, I need to have a table saw jig that is easy to use, and as Rick and the Blue Devils pointed out in the comments, a safer distance for my fingers. I had seen techniques that use the miter slot on the table saw to guide a sled accurately while holding the timber to be cut securely using clamps. I set about making such a sled and glued it up. However, I later realised that I screwed up in two different ways. Mistake number one was when I was gluing the guides, I let them move about and they weren't straight. Mistake number two was that I used timber that was too thick, so the overall height of my cut was way too much for the blade of the table saw, something I completely forgot about. At this point I walked away and was very disappointed in myself and felt quite down. Not just mentally, but I also physically felt it in my chest. I took Randy for a walk, had dinner, and then was watching some YouTube to get my mind off what had happened. After reading Morgan's comment in the last video about how it was motivating to see me making mistakes and learning from them, my spirits were lifted. Many thanks for the kind words, Morgan. And as it usually happens when I walk away from things, my mind has a chance to process the problem, and then suddenly a better way pops into my mind about what to do next, and I was reinvigorated to get back into it. Sometimes it amazes me the whirlwind of emotions you can go through in a matter of hours. I decided to use the clamps I had and use them to apply downforce to the piece being sawed along with being braced on a solid length of wood. When I looked at the clamps, I realised I could remove the bottom section and then I could utilise a hole in the clamp bar to lock it into the bracing wood. I tried some spare cabinetry door screw thingies and they were a failure as they didn't go too deep into the brace. A longer screw worked much better, however the clamp pivoted on the spot so it wasn't rigid. I worked out I could brace the clamp bar with another screw and this was better, enough to remain secure when cutting on the saw. My first test was a success. It cut nice and straight just like I needed. This jig worked well for its purpose and I was able to rip those 12 lengths in no time. And as you can see, my hands were clear from the blade, so it was a much safer solution overall. When later reflecting on how I could make the jig better, I'll use some right-handed aluminium, either way, on either side of the clamp bar, and that will keep it stable and secure. There's lots of things to learn as I go through this woodworking journey. I know that there's better track and clamping systems available to buy that will do just this, but for now, what I've got works and it does what's required. Once I had that correct edge on all 12 pieces, I was ready to run them through the thicknesser to bring them down to the width I require, 1.5 inches. And as I talked about in the last video, a lesson I learned was to run each length through at one height and then adjust the cut height. A time-saving method indeed. But eventually they were all the same and I could speed up the process by fitting multiple lengths at the same time. The thicknesser has two speeds. One that is faster, which is the depth cut. It does 96 cuts per inch. In the final passes, I switched over to the finishing speed, which is slower at 179 cuts per inch. At this slower speed, I was able to feed 3 links in at one time. It's a nice feeling getting to this point, seeing all those pieces milled to the thickness I require, all from pallet wood I got from work. With all those lengths ready to go, now it's time to start cutting them to length and building the frame. I've made some notes on my tablet with the specific steps I need to follow at this point so I don't screw up by getting distracted. My first step is to pair up the 8 lengths I will use for the legs and roughly mark out where I will be cutting these. They will be 36 inches in length. I also mark the pairs with matching numbers so I know which ones go together. I then decide which sections of the remaining lengths will be the rails and the stretchers. I need 4 rails at 18 inches and 3 stretchers at 20.5 inches. I'm making sure any knots in the wood will not be in the spots where screws will be placed. To do all of this cutting, I'll be using my sled. This will ensure nice, accurate, clean cuts, and it's also much safer to use. The first thing I do is cut one end of each length before I start cutting them to size. Due to the length of the legs, my sled doesn't extend out 36 inches, so I've screwed an extra length of wood to the sled so I can clamp a stopper to it. This then allows me to cut each leg to the exact same length. Next is the 3 lengths of 20.5 inches for the stretchers, and then finally the 4 lengths of the rails at 18 inches. And there we have it. All of the pieces of wood I require for the frame of the router table are ready. At this point, I feel like I'm actually making some progress. It's taking longer than expected, however. I had to learn quite a few things and make some jigs, and that's all part of the journey. It's time to leave it here for now. Let me know how you think I'm progressing thus far in the comments below. Until next time, bye!